Imagine standing in a dark, damp dungeon, pulling on a heavy suit and a wolf mask. The mask is pressed tightly to your face, and the narrow slits for the eyes and mouth barely let in any air, and every breath echoes dully inside the beast's muzzle. There are other people around you, one in a bearskin with roughly sewn-on ears, another in the form of a deer with long wooden antlers. None of you speak, because they have long understood here that words will not help. Suddenly, in the silence, a dull gong sounds. You will recognize this sound from 1,000. It means only one thing: the hunt has begun. The iron bolts clank as they slide to the side, and the massive door at the far end of the cellar slowly opens. He appears in the doorway, King João. In one hand, he holds a long spear, the other lies on his belt, to which a whip is attached. Behind him stand several guards with torches, their flames snatching from the darkness of the walls, wet with stains, and the floor, where dirt is mixed with straw and old stains, the origin of which no one discusses. The king is in no hurry. He looks at you the way a hunter looks at hunted animals. His eyes are shining, and in the silence, you can hear him laughing softly. He's silent for a few seconds, giving you time to run, and that is enough. Fear makes you rush forward. The narrow corridor winds. In the darkness, you cling to a damp stone with your hand. You stumble into a puddle. It is hard to breathe. The mask sticks to your face, and the heavy suit makes it difficult to move. But the main thing is that you know that he is not running after you. He is walking, slowly, confidently, because he is sure that he will catch up with you. Also, please subscribe to my channel and put a like on this video. Write in the comments your thoughts on this topic. I am very happy to explore the traces of the past together with you. These cellars existed long before João ascended the throne. They were built to store wine, weapons, and grain, but he turned them into his own arena, a labyrinth where man became game. There were cells, each with a small window for serving food. The walls between them were thick. The doors were covered with iron. Only tiny cracks let in the rare light. During the day, there was total darkness, and only the guards' torches lit the corridors at night, casting flickering shadows. The role of game was played by a variety of people. Sometimes they were commoners, captured without explanation. Sometimes they were courtiers who had displeased the king. All of them disappeared from ordinary life and ended up in a dungeon, where they were dressed in animal costumes and deprived of their names. The king said that this shows the true nature of man, that deep down, each of us is an animal that either hunts or runs. He saw these nights not as a game, but as an affirmation of his power. He decided who would be the hunter and who would be the hunted. According to rare eyewitnesses, the hunt lasted for hours. The king could chase his prey through the entire labyrinth, driving it into dead ends. Sometimes he would deliberately slow down, letting the captive believe that he would be able to escape. But in the end, the familiar sound of footsteps would always be heard behind him, and the game was over. For the servants, these cellars became a cursed place. Even those who never went down there knew about the dull sound of a gong that would occasionally echo through the palace at night. After that, they said, in the darkness, one could hear sounds like growling, heavy breathing, and the hurried stamping of feet interspersed with the king's laughter. Here, in the stone corridors, Juan felt truly alive. Here he was both a hunter and a judge. Here a man ceased to be a man. After nights of fun in the cellars, the king found new quirks, and one of them became, perhaps, the strangest in his biography. It all began unnoticed. He began to disappear more and more often in the royal tomb, a place where even the bravest courtiers entered with caution. The tomb was located beneath the old chapel of the palace. It was a large but oppressive room with high stone vaults supported by massive columns. Wrought iron torch holders hung on the walls, but even with their light, the far corners of the room were dark. The air was heavy and stale, with a faint smell of decay, stone, and old fabric. João visited this place almost daily. Sometimes he came alone, sometimes with 2 or 3 guards, whom he ordered to stand aside and not say a word. The king walked slowly between the sarcophagi, as if choosing whom to address, but he almost always stopped at the same one, a massive coffin with a carved bas-relief depicting a woman with delicate features and long, wavy hair. It was a queen who lived several generations before him. She died young, and her story has long since passed into the realm of court legends. At first, he simply stood there, looking at the stone lid and the carved inscriptions. Then he began to linger longer, whispering something barely audible, sometimes laughing, sometimes delivering entire monologues. The servants, who were allowed into the hall, claimed that he spoke to her as if she were alive. One day, the king ordered the lid of the sarcophagus to be removed. It was not easy. The stone was heavy. Several people had to move it, and each jerk echoed dully throughout the hall. When the lid finally came off, the face of the deceased appeared in the light of the torches. It was dry, dark, with skin-tight cheekbones, but regular features could still be discerned in it. A high forehead, a straight nose, closed lips. On her temples lay thin, sparse strands of hair, which seemed golden in the light. The dress was faded, but richly decorated. Remnants of gold threads and tarnished pearls still clung to the fabric. João was silent for a long time, looking at her. Then he said that this woman was still worthy of being a queen, and that he intended to make her his wife. Preparations began immediately. The king ordered the body to be carefully removed and transferred to separate chambers. There it was laid on a table covered with expensive fabrics, and the work began. The fabric of the dress was adjusted. The head was anointed with aromatic oils to kill the smell of decay. He ordered a new outfit to be made, a silk dress of a deep blue color, with gold embroidery and pearl threads. A crown of fine gold was decorated with rubies. The servants who performed this work tried not to exchange glances. Any sign of disgust could lead to disaster. The king did not tolerate even a hint of ridicule. There were rumors that one of the squires, hearing the order to try on a new outfit for the dead bride, chuckled nervously and was immediately sent out of the palace in chains. The day of the ceremony was a test for all the nobility. In the main hall of the palace, long tables were laid, filled with dishes. The walls were decorated with tapestries, and musicians stood at the entrance. But the main attention was drawn to the scene by the thrones. There were two of them. The king sat on one, and she on the other. She sat motionless in a new shiny dress, with a crown on her head, and her empty gaze was directed somewhere above the guests. João held her hand and leaned over from time to time, as if whispering something in her ear. He made toasts on her behalf, raising her palm, demanding that the guests bow and raise their glasses in honor of the new queen. The atmosphere in the hall was strange and heavy. Music played, goblets were filled with wine, but conversations were conducted in whispers. Some courtiers looked away, avoiding eye contact with the motionless figure. Others, on the contrary, watched the king's every move, afraid to miss a sign or an order. The feast lasted for several hours. The king spoke of this wedding as a union that would last for centuries, and that his bride would live in his chambers. After the celebration, he ordered her to be moved to a specially prepared room. There the walls were covered with fabric, the floor was carpeted, and in the center stood a wide bed covered with fresh sheets. The body remained there for a long time. Sometimes the king himself visited her. Sometimes he ordered the guards to protect the queen from prying eyes. But one day, after several weeks, the bride disappeared. No one knew exactly what happened to her. Some said that he ordered her to be buried secretly again. Others, that she was sent to one of his country castles where the strangest relics were kept. After the story with the dead bride, Juan seemed to have gone off the chain. If earlier his quirks could be attributed to his eccentric character, now they turned into a whole system of intimidation. The king decided that dinners should not just be luxurious. They should frighten, shock, and break the will of the guests. The main hall of the palace was transformed into a sinister scene before the banquets. The walls were draped with dark scarlet fabrics, so thick in color that they resembled dried blood. Silver cups and golden dishes stood on long tables, but the main attention was always focused on the center, on strange, almost theatrical culinary compositions. The servants brought in the food slowly, as if at a ceremonial ceremony. Sometimes it was roast piglets, but cut up so that the bones inside were stained a deep red. Sometimes they brought giant pies from which, when cut, a thick, sticky sauce flowed out, like fresh blood. The king liked these dishes to resemble human body parts. The more realistically, the better. Rumors had been circulating among the servants for a long time. Some dishes were not made from ordinary meat. The products for them were brought in closed boxes, and those who accidentally looked inside later refused to tell what they saw. Officially, these were overseas delicacies, but their smell and appearance made the cooks laugh nervously and their hands tremble. Sometimes large copper bowls containing real animal entrails were brought into the room. They were arranged to resemble scenes from an anatomical theater. Livers, hearts, ligaments. All of this lay on cushions of fresh greenery, with steam rising above them. The king took particular pleasure in ordering his servants to tilt the bowls towards the guests so that they could better smell the aroma. Some courtiers covered their faces with handkerchiefs, but pretended to nod enthusiastically. At one of the feasts, Juan staged a special act. A huge platter was placed in the center of the table, on which lay what looked like a human rib cage. It was cut from burnt calf bones, but inside, instead of meat, lay the mixed entrails of several animals, covered in red sauce. The king loudly announced that everyone must take out their piece with their hands. Those who hesitated received a long look from him, the very one after which no one dared to contradict. The wine flowed like a river, but it was drunk mostly to drown out the taste and smell. The musicians played slow, drawn-out melodies, and the room was filled with a heavy, sweetish smell, a mixture of spices, wine, and fresh offal. One of the foreign ambassadors who attended such a feast later wrote in his diary that he had never seen anything more strange and disgusting in his life. According to him, it was not a feast, but a ritual designed to prove the power of one man over another's will. After midnight, when the guests were barely able to stand on their feet, the king usually made his final move. He ordered dessert to be served. These were small pastries shaped like human eyes, ears, or fingers, with a filling of sweet almonds and fruit. But their appearance was so realistic that many did not dare touch them. João would deliberately take one of the pastries, break it, and show with a smile how thick syrup was flowing from the inside. When leaving the hall, the guests often looked pale, as if they had just been not at a celebration, but at a crime scene. But no one, not even the most influential nobleman, dared to refuse an invitation to the next feast. Because in the royal palace, refusal is not just disrespect, but a challenge that could end very badly. For João, this was not gastronomy. It was a show of power in which fear, disgust, and perverse luxury were woven into a single, carefully planned spectacle. And each participant knew, here you either play by the rules or become part of them. After eccentric feasts and strange amusements, João found a new way to assert his power. He declared that no one at court had the right to look him straight in the eye. It did not matter who you were, a courtier, a servant, or an ambassador from a distant land. Looking at the monarch was considered a crime, for which an exemplary punishment was required. At first, it seemed like a strange but harmless quirk. However, everything changed when one morning became the last for the young squire who accidentally met the king's gaze in the throne room. After that day, jokes about it disappeared from the palace. The ban turned into a law, overgrown with fear and rituals. The palace corridors were filled with strange scenes. Nobles walked with their eyes fixed on the floor. Servants looked away even before the king entered the hall, and guards, meeting him, turned away to the wall. Even at the moment of audience, subjects spoke, looking to the side or at their feet, afraid that their gaze might accidentally intersect with the king's. Every violation of this rule was turned into a public punishment. It was done slowly, without haste, and was calculated to instill horror in all who saw. Special instruments, metal tongs and knives were brought into the throne room, and copper bowls with thick, caustic liquids were placed nearby. Everything happened right in front of witnesses, courtiers, ambassadors, noble ladies, who, turning pale, but not daring to look away, watched what was happening. The smell of burnt metal and wet fabric filled the hall, mixing with the aroma of wax and old stone. The screams of the intruder echoed off the high vaults, echoing throughout the room. At that moment, everyone present understood that no nobility or merit would save them if they suddenly met the king's gaze. Gradually, fear permeated every movement and gesture of the courtiers. People began to walk sideways, to descend the stairs backwards, so as not to accidentally turn to face the king. At receptions, the king liked to slowly walk around the hall, stopping behind the guests, deliberately getting so close that they could feel his breath, but did not dare turn around. It was a silent test, from which many hands trembled and back muscles tensed. The king's chambers contained strange collections, small objects neatly arranged in cabinets, each with a plaque indicating the name of the person to whom it belonged. Among them were grim souvenirs from those who had broken the ban. It was rumored that the king sometimes approached these cabinets at night, sorted through their contents, and smiled. At the same time, he became increasingly suspicious. Sometimes he would appear before the people wearing a thick mask covering his face, or hide behind a translucent cloth during audiences. On other days, on the contrary, he would appear without warning, entering rooms and corridors in the dead of night with a torch in his hands, causing people to flinch and immediately look away, the rule of not looking into the eyes became more than just a whim. It became an instrument of power. It subjugated people not by the threat of death, but by constant psychological pressure. Anyone who fell into the king's orbit lived in a state where one wrong look could be the last. This fear permeated the walls of the palace. It was felt in the heavy air of the corridors, in the muffled steps on the marble floors, in the silence that fell when the king entered the hall. João turned his own face into a weapon and made it so that the very fact of his gaze was tantamount to a sentence. Towards the end of his reign, João seemed to be competing with himself in inventing ever more ridiculous and monstrous entertainment. He had already organized hunts for people in animal costumes, feasted on dishes resembling human flesh, and punished subjects for an accidental glance. But one day, he decided that the world needed a new ceremony that could outshine everything he had done before. The occasion was a whim that had long been whispered about at court. The king announced that in his domain there lived a couple of lovers worthy of a royal wedding. When everyone began to guess who they were talking about, João clarified they would be two bears. He ordered a huge male and a young female to be caught in the nearby forests. The animals were brought to the palace in heavy cages, where they, dazed by the noise and cramped quarters, rushed from corner to corner. The king personally inspected them, giving his servants instructions to dress up the bride and groom. Preparations for the wedding lasted several weeks. A caftan of expensive fabric, decorated with gold buttons, was sewn for the male bear. A semblance of a crown was made on his muzzle, secured with belts. The female was dressed in a lush dress with lace, and a long white veil was attached to her head, falling over her eyes. The animals, not understanding what was being done to them, growled, tried to tear off their clothes, but they were pacified with blows and chains. João ordered a real feast to be held in the throne room, inviting all the nobility to it. Enormous tables were laden with food, drinks, and foreign sweets. A platform was erected in the center of the hall, on which stood decorated cages with the groom and bride. When the guests had gathered, the ceremony began. At the king's signal, the cages were opened, and the bears, chained to chains, were brought out onto the platform. Servants pulled them in different directions, forcing them to stand opposite each other. At this time, a specially invited priest read a solemn speech, interspersed with words about the purity and sanctity of marriage. The nobles, with difficulty hiding their shock, raised their goblets when Juan turned to them. To strengthen the alliance, the king ordered the animals to be fed right in front of the guests. Servants brought huge bowls of meat, still dripping with juices, and placed them nearby. The bears, exhausted by hunger, rushed to the food, but the chains did not allow them to approach right away. They had to stretch, growling and tearing the floor with their claws. This noise, interspersed with the king's laughter, filled the entire hall. João was enjoying the proceedings. He walked around the platform, looking at the animals and commenting on their behavior as if it were a normal wedding banquet. Sometimes he snapped his fingers, forcing the servants to urge the bears on, or to refill the wine they were being forced to drink, causing nervous laughter from the guests. The culmination was the wedding procession. João ordered that the bears be led through the hall in front of all the guests, like newlyweds. Servants pulled them with chains, and in their hands they carried trays with flowers and sweets, which immediately fell to the floor when the animals tore them with their teeth. For the king, this was the pinnacle of power, to make hundreds of people dressed in their finest applaud, smile, and raise their glasses in honor of the marriage of two wild animals. In João's eyes, this was not just a performance, but proof that he could dictate reality and replace it with his whims. When the ceremony was over, the animals were returned to their cages. Rumor had it that they disappeared shortly afterward, either released or part of another royal feast. But no one dared ask about that. The memory of the witnesses was left with a picture: a magnificent throne room, the deafening roar of the bears, the smell of expensive incense mixed with the smell of the beast, and the laughter of the monarch, which seemed louder than everything else. It was a wedding that no one would have dared to call abnormal in his time, but which everyone remembered as one of the most insane scenes in the history of his reign.